Hi everyone, this is Hannah from the Narrate team. This past weekend, Josh talked about the aspirations of us all and asked the question, what happens when we take our negative thinking about ourselves and replace it with imagining what is God's hope for our life?
So, if we haven't met yet, my name is Josh, and I get to be on staff here at Narrate, and one of the things that I get to do is work with a remarkable group of leaders in serving our middle school and high school students. This past weekend, we had our high school ski retreat, and just to share a story from that retreat, we stayed at Fairmount Hot Springs, and during the evening on Saturday night, we were in the pool, and it was relatively warm. It was kind of cold outside, probably 15, 20 degrees and a bit windy. So the pool was relatively warm, but a group of students had the idea of getting out of this relatively warm pool into the 15 to 20 degree air and then rolling around in the snow for as long as they could and then jumping back into the pool. To which I just want to respond with, really guys, there's something else we can do here that I'm sure is fun and doesn't involve pain. One student in particular, his name is Rick. He got in the snow for a particularly long time and he jumped back into the pool, and he's like, I feel like I have cat scratches all over my body. And I was like, see, that's what I'm telling you. We don't have to do this, Rick. I promise you. And of course, they convinced me to do it too. Admittedly, I did not win the contest for how long you could stay in the snow, but I'm fine with that. But probably my favorite part from the weekend was riding on the lifts with different students. And, we have a fair amount of new students in our high school group, and then a fair amount of those who have been faithful and around for a long time. And what I loved hearing was these different groups of students speaking about one another. Like, he's cool, she's kind. And seeing those positive relationships developed between the students. Because, of course, our Hellenist students are in desperate need for positive relationships right now. And so I think for me, that was the biggest win of the weekend. And I'm looking forward to next weekend with our middle schoolers. I'm sure there will be an equal amount of absurdities, but also an equal amount of positive outcomes too. So if you guys could look at the screen, there's a picture here of these two people. Their names are Mary Johnson and Oshea Israel. And for 12 years, sorry it's not the greatest picture, it's the best one I could find online. For 12 years, Mary hated Oshea. And she hated him because at 16 years old, Oshea went to a party. And at that party was Mary's only child, only son. He was 20 years old. And Oshea got into an altercation with Mary's son and ended up shooting and killing him. And so Mary, rightfully so, had a rage toward Oshea. And in the courtroom, and through all that process, the state decided that Oshea would be in prison for 16 years. So he's 16 years old. He's going to get out of prison at 32 years old. Half of his life is going to be spent in prison. And during a chunk of these 16 years, for 12 years, Mary sat and just fumed over what this man had done to her. How much loss and grief that she had experienced because of Oshea's horrible decision. But eventually, after, toward the end of these 12 years, she started to decide that I've got to forgive this young man to move forward, to get better in my own life, and also to enable him to get better as well. And so she started to contact the prison that he was in and asked him, could I come over to the prison and meet with you? And he responded with no way. Because imagine, all of that shame. He had caused her so much loss. Why would you want to meet with her now? But she kept persisting, and eventually Oshea agreed to meet with her. And so she went to the prison. And I don't know how prison rules work. I imagine it varies per prison. But they got to be in the same room together for an extended period of time. And they started to converse with one another. And what Mary discovered as she started to talk to Oshea and just share with him her life and what the past 12 years of her life have looked like, she started to understand that Oshea's identity was not caught up only in him being a convicted murderer, but that also he was a human being that was worthy of love and connection. And the forgiveness in her started to become easier and easier. And then on top of that, he looking at her, started to understand that she was not just some woman that was filled with rage toward him. In the interview that I listened to, and it's actually referenced on the mind maps there in the resources, O'Shea described Mary as someone who in the courtroom, he looked at her and he said, it was if you would have come across the courtroom and killed me if you could have. And she agreed that, yes, I totally would have done that if I could have. But anyway, he started to learn of her that she was, yes, a woman who had experienced a lot of grief and loss because of his bad decision, but then also, too, she was a woman who had gone through an immense amount of work, an immense process of trying to forgive O'Shea for what he had done. And as O'Shea succinctly described it, he said that in that moment, we again became human to each other. And so they had this conversation, and eventually, it's time for Mary to leave, and she stands up, and she's so consumed with emotion that she starts to collapse in the room that they're standing in. And I'm surprised the prison guards let O'Shea do this, but he ran over and he grabbed her and he embraced her. And that really led to a hug. And Mary said that in the midst of that hug, she knew that in that moment, all the grief and loss that she had to work through and all the forgiveness that she had been working through as well was done. It was over. And then for O'Shea, at least in her eyes, his identity was not solely him being a convicted murderer, but also he was a human being that's worthy of love and connection and perhaps even a second chance. He was a boy who made a bad decision, and his life was completely derailed because of it. And it was her aim to see redemption for him. But of course, in the eyes of the state, O'Shea still had 4 more years on his sentence. And so he served those 4 more years, and then he got out of prison. And of course, there's government programs in place that help people get established back into society. But Mary played a big role as well. Mary essentially adopted him. And as this picture shows, he actually moved into an apartment that was right next to hers. And so she was continually checking in on him, helped him with college applications, helped him in college, gave him dating advice, helped him with getting a job and so on. And really, she essentially adopted him. And she started to describe him as her son. At one point in the interview, Mary said this: "Well, my natural son is no longer here. I didn't see him graduate, and now you're going to college. I'll have the opportunity to see you graduate. I didn't see him getting married. Hopefully one day I'll be able to experience that with you because I love you too, son." Can you imagine how much work she had to go through to forgive this man named O'Shea Israel? Now for O'Shea, his story ends in redemption, right? But whenever he was 16 years old, and I'm sure there was a series of bad decisions that led ultimately to this tragic one that totally derailed his life. But that decision totally took him off track. I don't know what his life was like before he was 16 years old. He probably, at least to a certain degree, had some potential, some hope, some kind of future. And it was totally eliminated as soon as he made that decision. And can you imagine what it would be like for an African-American man in Minneapolis who's an ex-convicted murderer to get out of prison at 32 years old and go back to school and try to become established in society again? It would have been immensely difficult if he did not have this woman, Mary. And it makes me think about moments in our lives whenever, of course, they haven't been as drastic as perhaps what O'Shea experienced here. But we find moments in our lives whenever we become derailed, whenever we kind of lose track of what was really intended of us. I've had several of those experiences. In fact, for me, I think it's fairly cyclic. Like I fall off track, get back on, fall off track, get back on. One particular lighthearted experience was whenever I was in college. I went to a small college, about 1,000 students. And it was in Springfield, Missouri. It's called Baptist Bible College, just a small conservative Christian school. And at this college, they had a security team. They must have had 15 people on their security team. And this security team, they were like super power hungry. Like if you parked in a 15-minute spot for 16 minutes, they're going to bust your chops. And we couldn't stand these guys. You know, if you park in the wrong parking lot and you have the wrong tag, they're going to give you a ticket. You know, my crew, my clique, we couldn't stand these guys. And I think it was mostly that we were entitled brats that couldn't deal with consequences. But it seemed like a large percentage of the student population couldn't stand the security guards because they were kind of power hungry. And so we started to develop a plan. How can we knock these guys down a notch? Because right now they think they're CIA agents and going to be the future Jason Bourne. How can we kind of knock them down a notch or two? And so we're sitting in the cafeteria. Guys, this is so weird. Like, I really hope I have a job after today. But we're sitting in the cafeteria. And in the cafeteria that day, it's me and my crew. There's like 8 of us sitting around a table. In the cafeteria that day was this line that had like pans and pans of hot dogs. You know, you can go get a hot dog and get a bun and dress it up however you want. And we started thinking to ourselves, like, you know, we have limited resources, but we have in this cafeteria unlimited hot dogs. What could we do with them? And so one guy said, what if we just like ambush the security guards and just started pelting them with hot dogs, you know, just completely and humiliate and shame them. And so one guy's like, yeah, that sounds a great idea. And then another guy was like, but the deal is we go to a small school. So if we do that, they're going to know who we are. And so one guy said, well, not if we dress like ninjas. So it's so weird. It's so weird. So anyway, we decided, hey, that's a pretty good idea. And so we start to strategize at this round table how we're going to ambush these security guards. And I wasn't a part of the first ambush, but I was a part of the second one. And, you know, one detail I failed to mention, to prepare for this ambush, we all like stuffed our pockets just chock full of hot dogs and took them back to our dorm and put them in our little mini fridge, you know. So anyway, on the second ambush, though, there was a prayer chapel on campus, Christian school. It was open till like midnight. And sometimes people would be doing things in that prayer chapel that would inhibit people from praying. And security guards would usually take care of that. And so we decided we would call the security guard and, hey, report some kind of problem. And so we did that. We had a friend called security and said, hey, there's a couple that's making out in the prayer chapel, and I would love to pray. So could you guys please come and take this couple out? And all the while, there's 6 of us hot dog ninjas, 3 on either side of this chapel, just ready to ambush this poor security guard and totally humiliate him. And so we hear the security guard drive up in front of the prayer chapel, and we hear him start walking up the stairs. And then, 3 on either side, we just start sprinting around this prayer chapel, and we come up on this guy. Now, can you imagine if you're one guy by yourself and all of a sudden you have 6 grown adult men dressed in total black except for right here coming at you? I would be absolutely terrified. And he just like shudders in fear. And we just I'm taking hot dogs in my pocket and start chucking at him. He's just like ducking in shame. That was the second ambush. We did it like 13 times over the course of our 4 years. And each time it would become more intricate and more detailed and more difficult for the security guards to catch us. And the dean of men and the security team, they became inflamed toward us. Gosh, I would love to share with you more of those, but we don't have time this morning. And so I had a friend who was on the security team. And he is venting to me about these hot dog ninjas. And he's like, man, these guys are tools, And he told me that at one point, this is like my junior year, so it was a couple years into this, they had developed a strategy for catching us. And the strategy was, if you're a security guard and you're on campus, regardless if you're on the clock or not, you need to have a radio on you. And so if you're in the dorms, in the library, at class, in the cafeteria, whatever, you need to have your radio on you. And if a security guard who is on the clock gets ambushed, he's going to call out code 43, and it's all hands on deck. We're going to catch these hot dog ninjas. Never caught us. Code 43 didn't work. Yes. All right? The dean of men, he never suspected that it was us. He did suspect that it was several other students in the crew or in the school. And so he would be calling groups of guys in and interrogating them. Is it you? Do you know who it is? And these guys are like, we have no idea who it is. And me and my friends, we were tight-lipped. We never shared with anyone, except for a handful of girlfriends. We never shared with anyone what we were doing, One security guard, he was so certain that a particular group of guys were the hot dog ninjas that he went and he pepper sprayed the toilet seats of their dorm floor in retaliation, and it wasn't actually them. And the reason why they never suspected it was us is because we were like keep the rules, work hard on school, the good kids, right? We became the outlaws of Baptist Bible College, and we loved it. We became local legends. Like, I remember sometimes walking in class and hearing people being like, I heard the Wiener Ninjas attacked again. And this is so not me, because I am astoundingly boring. And I love keeping the rules. Like, I am not opposed to driving 15 miles an hour in a school zone during the summer months on a Sunday afternoon, right? That's fine by me. And if someone invited me to a party, or someone's like, hey, we got a party, and you're invited, I'd be like, whoa, I'm actually invited this time? And they said, we're going to read a couple of New York Times articles and then talk about them for a couple hours. I'd be like, man, this party's going to be banging. Like, that sounds like my kind of fun, right? I'm astoundingly boring. And so for me to be doing this and breaking the rules and so on, it was not my identity. But I loved it, and it was super funny, and something that we still talk. One of my closest friends in that group, he lives in Detroit now. I talked to him a few days ago, and we just talked about, remember the hot dog ninjas? But there's been also other parts of my characteristics, of my identity that has gotten off track that definitely had negative implications. For someone like me, whenever someone brushes up against me a little bit, I'm not the one to initially listen and hear. I'm also not the one to get hurt. And it might be controlled anger, but I'll respond in some anger, And I don't think that's what was intended for me. I don't think that's my means of enjoying a fulfilled life. Or think about someone who's enslaved to work, which is, if I'm not careful, I can also become a workaholic, and all of a sudden that all of my value is dependent on the outcomes of my work. And life is so much bigger than that. I know that some of you, and I can say this for myself as well, have experienced rejection and loneliness. And it's so hard in those moments to not think of yourself as someone who is unlikable and unworthy of love and connection. We could go on, right, about ways that we can get off track and find our identity in a negative thing, rather than looking at the wholeness of who God made us to be. And this is nothing new. This is something that people have been experiencing for millennia, right? One group of people that experienced it were the people of Israel. Thousands of years ago, God approached a man by the name of Abram. And he actually had his name changed to Abraham, which means father of many nations. And God said to him that I'm going to make you into a great nation. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. That group of words there is filled with promise. And this is what the people of Israel understood about themselves. But then over the course of history, they made some decisions that were necessary and good, but also some bad decisions as well. They started to reside in the empire of Egypt. And as often happens within empire, things went south and they became enslaved in Egypt. And I know we've talked about this story a few times at Narrate over the past few years, but it just really picks up on these themes this morning. And for the people of Israel, they experienced grinding oppression for 400 years. And that idea that you will be a great nation and you will be blessed and you will be a blessing to people, it was lost. That had been stripped from their identity. In fact, ancient historians say that the Egyptians, they had quotas for their slaves. And Israel was a group of their slaves. And really their quota was you have to build an X amount of bricks over the course of a day, a month, a year, whatever. And if you do not make those bricks, then you are worthless to us. And they were killed. And so their identity for 400 years became wrapped up in how I can fulfill my brick quota. And eventually God rescued them from this, right? And underneath some miraculous events and also underneath the leadership of some remarkable people, Israel finally got to exodus out of Egypt. And once they were out of Egypt, God started to establish back in them their true identity, who they were truly meant to be. And one of the means for him to do this was he instituted a practice called the Sabbath. And all of you know this, but the Sabbath is over the course of 7 days, take one day and just rest and reflect on who you are and what you're meant to be. And I'm sure that there are a host of reasons why God made this practice for the people of Israel. But one implication, I don't think it's dishonest to say this, is that he was trying to remind the people of Israel, you are so much more than building bricks. The institution of the Sabbath goes like this in Deuteronomy 5. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. And then he hearkens it back to Egypt. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, that your identity was caught up in fulfilling a brick quota, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Yes, rest is an implication of the Sabbath, right? But also there is another implication too, that God was trying to help the people of Israel realize that original promise that you will be a great nation, you will be blessed, and you will be a blessing to others. Now, with that said, with stories of Mary Johnson and O'Shea, Israel, or stories of the nation of Israel being enslaved in Egypt and then being miraculously taken out of there and having their identity rewritten, it makes us ask the question, well, where have I gone? Where have I been derailed? Where have I lost track? And it's not necessarily because of your own decisions, right? It might be because of the results of others' decisions in your life. But what parts of me are not what God intended for me? Going back to that story of Mary Johnson and O'Shea, Israel. Mary Johnson, whenever she said to O'Shea, you are my son now. I love you too, son. O'Shea responded with this. It motivates me to make sure that I stay on the right path. You still believe in me, and the fact that you can do it, despite how much pain I caused you, it's amazing. In this story, we see a parent, essentially, adoptive, but a parent nonetheless. A parent's love motivating this son, O'Shea, to move forward and see redemption in his life. Now, what if God has aspirations of us all? Just like any parent, any good parent would have aspirations for their own children. I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to what it's like to have aspirations for my own children, but I am a son. And as I've gotten older, I've learned more and more just how much my parents loved me. I've been going through this process, and I think I've talked a little bit about it before, called this gratefulness journal. And really what I'm trying to do is record every moment in my life that I can be grateful for. Of course, it's not going to be exhaustive. That's impossible. But as far back as I can remember to toddlerhood, record moments that I can be grateful for. And in this recording, especially those first, like from toddlerhood to 10 years old or whatever, and of course still now too, But in those first 7, 8 years, I'm noticing that a lot of my gratefulness is toward what my parents did for me. And I cannot neglect the fact that my parents had so many aspirations for me then. And still do. They want me to get married in 3 days, but that's not going to happen, okay? I'm not making any rash decisions, Mom and Dad. But my parents had aspirations for us, or for me. What if God has aspirations for us? God as a parent. One verse particularly that captures God as a parent is in 1 John chapter 3, verse 1, where it says, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God." And that is what we are. What if God loves us so much, then he would love nothing more than to see us fulfill who he has made us to be. Now the kicker, though, is God's forgiveness is there. But we need to embrace that forgiveness too. We need to forgive ourselves. Just to go back on that story one more time of Mary Johnson and O'Shea Israel. O'Shea understood that Mary had forgiven him, but he was having difficulty forgiving himself. He said at one point in that interview, "Sometimes I still don't know how to take it because I haven't totally forgiven myself yet. It's something that I'm learning from you. I won't say that I have learned it yet because it's still a process that I'm going through." What if it also takes a requirement of ourselves whenever we catch ourselves derailed, whenever we catch ourselves not embracing perhaps what God made us to be, who he intended us to be, we need to also embrace the practice of forgiving ourselves too. I meet with many of you, and what seems to be common, and I don't think this is particular to Narrate, I think it's a general human thing, and I think I'm the guiltiest of it all, but it seems like a lot of people have a hard time with being gentle toward themselves. People are incredibly skilled on being hard on themselves. What if it takes for us to embrace what God meant for us? What if it takes for us to also forgive ourselves and get away from the negative thinking? Get away from the negative characteristics and approach growth through the lens of what is God's hope for my life? As this question says here, what happens when we take our negative thinking and replace it with imagining what is God's hope for our lives? And what if in that approach, when we catch ourselves derailed and not being who God maybe intended us to be, we can understand that God has an aspiration and a hope for us. And he would want nothing more than for us to live as fulfilled life as we possibly can. We're going to sing a song here in a minute called "Open Up Our Eyes." And in this song, it talks about how greater is the one who is in us, and God's love endures forever. And what this song kind of reminds me of is from the story of Mary Johnson and O'Shea Israel, that O'Shea's redemption, it started with Mary's forgiveness. And then with the people of Israel being enslaved in Egypt, it started with God bringing them out of Egypt and then reminding them through the practice of the Sabbath that you are so much more than building bricks. And so as we sing this song, may we recall that there might be characteristics of us that we're not keen on, but that there is one who is greater in us, who has already started the process of redemption for each and every one of us, and that we have been given the capacity because of the love that the Father has lavished on us for hope, for change, for growth, for the better of us, and for the better of those whom we share our lives with. So could we pray really quick? God, thanks so much that you're a good father, a good parent. You have aspirations for us. And God, sometimes we can get off track from those hopes, those dreams you have for us. But we know that the process of redemption is available to us, that your forgiveness is there, and God, that what it takes now is for us to embrace that forgiveness, to forgive ourselves, and trust in the hope that we have received from you. We love you so much. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.